Good evening and welcome to the Hollywood Babylonians. Hello, friends. This is your happy Hollywood history host, Mr. Ben Burke, with our fourth ever episode of the Hollywood Babylonians, your favorite classic film and Hollywood history podcast, in which we discuss the greatest films of old Hollywood and the history behind them. And today, for our very special fourth episode, I have one of my great friends. He's a great actor, he's a great human being, and most importantly, he is a great dog dad to two adorable dogs. His name is Garrett McPherson. Hello, Garrett.
Hey, Ben, how's it going?
Good, how about you?
I am doing well.
Why don't we talk about what we came here to talk about today, which is William Keighley's and Michael Curtiz's swashbuckling Technicolor epic from Warner Brothers in 1938, starring Errol Flynn, Olivia de Havilland, Alan Hale, Basil Rathbone, Claude Rains, Una O'Connor, and on and on and on. The Adventures of Robin Hood. Garrett, do you like this movie?
I did. I enjoyed it. I hadn't seen it before.
Oh, really?
Yeah, now that, when I watching through it, I've seen the Disney version with the Fox, and
Everybody has.
When it comes to, Robin Hood movies, that's a big one from my childhood, and then Robin Hood Men in Tights, which is the Mel Brooks spoof of all of them. So this one was fun because it was cool to see where those movies take their cues from, and it's obviously this movie. Everybody's trying to be Errol Flynn in those movies. The swashbuckling, sword fighting, it was really cool. I really enjoyed it. It was gorgeous. The Technicolor in that was beautiful. Obviously, they were trying to show it off with the costumes and the set pieces and everything like that. You could tell that they were really excited to work with color. It was cool, and it's 1938, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, which is also one of my favorite years for film because that's Gone with the Wind and Stagecoach and Wizard of Oz and Mr. Smith. No, that's 41. But yeah, it's a great year for movies. So This was one surprisingly I hadn't seen and really enjoyed the whole thing. Yeah.
Right. Oh, yes, for sure. That period of 38 and 39. Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, I think, was 39.
Oh, it was 39.
Because,
okay.
Yeah, Jamie and I talked about the Philadelphia story 2 weeks ago.
And that's 41, right?
That's 40. So
40,
he had been, Jimmy Stewart had been in Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, which I found out last night. He was a beau of Olivia de Havilland, and she wanted him to propose, but he never proposed to her. Anyway, he was nominated for Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, but he did not win. But he won for the Philadelphia story, which so many people think is just, like a consolation prize.
Yeah, it's kind of like Leonardo DiCaprio. I mean, he was great in The Revenant, but he should have won for 3 other movies and he didn't. So they give it to him later on. It becomes cumulative versus the one film. His Philadelphia story is great, but it's a romantic comedy and those don't normally win those awards. I guess when the award's 10, 15 years old that it was at that time, maybe, but
right. I know it's surprising that it was nominated for so many, but I think it's a testament. What Jamie and I talked about, testament to Katharine Hepburn.
Yeah.
And plus, Jimmy Stewart hadn't had really another role at Metro at that point that was like that.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden he showed everybody that he could play that. But yes, also that period of 38 and 39 when Wizard of Oz and Gone with the Wind and The Women and Stagecoach and Dodge City, they were all shooting in 38. To be released in 39, and that's another part of the history. On Karina Longworth's podcast, you must remember this, because there had been that Hollywood Reporter article that was released. It labeled several different Hollywood stars as box office poison in 1937, and it said that there was a giant recession at the box office in 1937. So what happened was there was a Hollywood Reporter article that was released that labeled different stars as box office poison and also said that the quality of films had fallen back so much. So then there was a long list of films that came from several Hollywood studios that said these are the films of 1938, and 1938 is going to be the greatest year in Hollywood ever, which ended up being 1939. But Adventures of Robin Hood was one of Jack Warner's promises to all of America that this is going to be one of the great films that is going to bring Hollywood back from this 36-37 recession.
From everything I can tell, it lived up to the hype, for sure.
It did.
There were some great moments. Like, the sword fighting's gorgeous and the swashbuckling is gorgeous, but some of my favorite parts are the parts that, like, the charm of old movies that sometimes, especially action movies, that have, there's like a clunkiness to them. It's not like now with, like, you know, the Rock movie where it's very smooth all the time and like flashy. There are times where they're literally picking up chairs or tables and throwing them down staircases in this movie that, like,
right.
I really appreciated, because it gave it this sense of, like, the filmmaking itself for something that was like such a spectacle and so gorgeous. It was like this sense of clunkiness, this sense of improvisation that's like, well, just throw the table at him, and you're like, it looks kind of funky, but at the same time, like, it gives it a weird sense of realism in a world where, like, realism isn't the point of those movies.
Exactly.
And that was just something I pointed out every time they threw a table or threw a chair, or just there was a little bit of clunkiness to it. And I was like, I love this, because it's like, you know, it's a big budget movie of the time, and like it's like, we're gonna get it done, and that's what makes sense. Versus now you lose a lot of that clunkiness. It just doesn't exist, which I thought that was cool. I wanted to remark on that, because it was funny to watch, and then it was like, that's charming. I like that.
Yes, and according to the documentary I watched, which is on the Adventures of Robin Hood Blu-ray, I think it was created by TCM back in the 90s, but also Errol Olivia and the Merry Men of Sherwood, The Making Adventures of Robin Hood by Rupert Alastair. All of that prop throwing, and like there's a part where Sir Guy and Robin Hood are fighting and they knock down this giant candelabra and they're jumping off of staircases and stuff like that. All of that was due to the director, Michael Curtiz. He wanted to make things so compositionally perfect, but he also loved the use of props and bringing them into the action of what was happening. So every time something was thrown, or like even when Robin Hood first enters Nottingham Castle, and he's like the epitome of virility because he has the deer draped around his shoulders, and he walks in and everybody creams their pants because it's just amazing. But that's all part of Michael Curtiz's charm, which we'll talk about eventually. I wanted to ask also, so Garrett, everybody listening is married to a wonderful person named Meredith Bennett, who is an amazing actress, amazing singer, amazing all-around person, as well as Garrett is. But what did Meredith think?
She enjoyed it. She didn't watch the whole thing with me. She was kind of in and out. She was working. She remarked on how, like, there are moments that translate to today, like, acting wise. Not all of them, because it's a different style. You know, we're almost like 85 years or 84 years removed from it. She remarked just kind of on how you could tell who the stock characters were. You could also tell who the stronger actors were. Claude Rains and Basil Rathbone there's a reason that they were in everything, you know, and there's a reason Errol Flynn did what he did, you know? And so I think it was cool. It was cool to talk to her about that. I mean, she's definitely watched classic movies and she enjoys them, but they're not necessarily, she comes at it from a different perspective than I do. And it was cool to see her kind of remark as well on the clunkiness on some of the moments that are like, there's a few times where Errol Flynn is laughing or Robin Hood is laughing, and it's like someone told him, I need this one shot of you to just laugh, and it's just like, it's cut. It's just the funniest thing, you know, like, it's, I know. And but at the same time, like, with the type of film it is, you buy into it. And you're like, we're telling this story. So it was cool. Sure. It was cool to talk to her about that, and just kind of how she's grown up too with the Robin Hood thing, because it's kind of a cultural flashpoint that everyone knows something about. Yeah, it was cool. She definitely enjoyed it. Obviously, watching it just because she was watching it because I had to watch it, but she enjoyed it for sure. And had some interesting notes. What she picked up on with the acting and some of that stuff was just different.
Yeah, I mean, it's 1938 Hollywood. It's all an elevated sort of realism, and it's presentationalism. But yes, like you said, Basil Rathbone, Claude Rains. Claude Rains will forever be my favorite actor from the golden age of Hollywood.
And he's in everything, man. He is. Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, Casablanca, like everything. Yes.
And he's exceptional in everything too.
Yeah, he is. To the point that, like, I didn't recognize him in this one. I was like, I think that's Claude Rains, but I'm not 100% sure because I hadn't looked at the cast. And he's just stellar.
I know.
And Basil Rathbone too.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, he's amazing. They're both amazing. It's a great group of Warner Brothers like stock characters. Everybody was under contract and everybody was a character actor. And in the documentary that I watched, it was like these people that they had cast as the different character actors, as the different Merry Men of Sherwood, as Bess. You know, they weren't people that would bring in people. They didn't sell tickets, but
Yeah.
if people bought a ticket to see an Errol Flynn movie, they were always glad to see like Claude Rains or
Yeah.
Eugene Pallett or Una O'Connor in it, even though they didn't go to the movie chiefly to see them.
Yeah. Well, and it's cool. It's kind of funny too because I don't know if you saw this, but I did. I'm sure you did. But the guy who played Little John, Alan Hale Sr., he played Little John in the Douglas Fairbanks version in 1922, and then played it again in a version in the 50s. So,
Yes.
so like made his whole career off of 3 movies playing the same role. 40 or 30 years apart. And so it's like it is cool to see where he's an example, but where in those classic movies, like they plug and play characters, like the what's her name? She's the nurse.
Una O'Connor.
Yeah,
Yes.
where you're like that woman obviously plays very specific roles, and this is the role.
Yes,
and she was great. She's fantastic, and I love seeing that because like Errol Flynn's great and swashbuckling, but Errol Flynn is playing Errol Flynn in everything.
He couldn't do anything else.
Yeah, because also why would he? He made tons of money doing it. He didn't have to, and it's fun to see that. I love that about old movies is you really see what typecasting can do and how that influenced what stories were written. Because if they had somebody who could fit this, that's who they were going to put in there. They knew it, and so they wrote that role to fit them, which you still see today, but not to this level. Like if I were to cast this with modern actors, it'd be a lot more difficult because it's like. You don't have very many actors today you have character actors, but like that are that niche that's all they do, but also can help sell tickets. It's changed.
Well, and studios don't have stock acting.
Yeah, exactly.
Anymore
they don't contract.
It made studio heads nervous to have people under contract and not have them working on a picture because they were being paid every single week.
Yeah, you had to put them in things.
They always had to have a role for Una O'Connor in a certain film, whatever it was. Well, Garrett, that was absolutely fascinating, and I think it was probably very, very helpful for all of our listeners in The Adventures of Robin Hood. So whether you've seen it or not, it'll kind of give you context around what we're about to talk about, which is the making of the 1938 Technicolor spectacle, The Adventures of Robin Hood, directed by William Keighley and Michael Curtiz. So, if we're going to talk about the history of The Adventures of Robin Hood, let's give credit to all of my sources. There's a wonderful book called Errol, Olivia, and the Merry Men of Sherwood, The Making of the Adventures of Robin Hood by Rupert Alastair. Got on Amazon. That was an amazing help. I listened to Karina Longworth's podcast. You must remember this. She does a podcast over Errol Flynn. And then TCM, and I believe his name is George Feltenstein. He works for the Warner Archive, and he's a Hollywood historian, and he preserves classic films. He put together 2 documentaries for the Robin Hood Blu-ray. One of them is a documentary about 3-strip Technicolor, hosted by Angela Lansbury, that you should all go watch. I think it's on YouTube. I could listen to Angela talk all day long. And then the other is a documentary that's primarily hosted by Leonard Maltin and Robert Osborne about the making of The Adventures of Robin Hood. So that's pretty much where I got all of my information from. I mean, we could go off in different rabbit trails all over the place talking about Errol Flynn, Olivia de Havilland, but I tried to hyper-focus just on the making of this movie. In order to understand kind of where the conception of Robin Hood came from, we have to go back to 1933 Hollywood. And at that time, Warner Brothers was known primarily for making very dark and gritty gangster films, which they did after 1933 as well. But in 1933, the production code went into effect, and the production code was the Hays Production Code that was implemented by a man named Will Hays, and he was in cahoots with the Catholic Legion of Decency. And Garrett, you and I are going to talk about this in a future episode, I think our next episode. about the production code, but pretty much there were certain things that